You didn't see that. Oh, well, look who it is. About bloody time. You've been waiting here for about 3 months now. Where the hell have you been? Give me that. Now go, scram. Been waiting too long for this, and I'm very disappointed in you. Bad Winston. It's a very bad Winston. Oh, don't look at me like that. You all locked him in the freezer as well, so stop it. Yes, it's finally time to take a look at the third chapter in the Tomb Raider series, Tomb Raider 3: The Adventures of Lara Croft. A game that on paper is better than the last one, but is considered pretty divisive by the fans of the classic series. I know a lot of you have been waiting for me to talk about this game for a while, and believe me, I've got quite a lot to say about this game, but I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone for your patience and understanding with this one, as this was a difficult game for me to cover, and I wanted to really make sure that I did it justice. First off, I just wanted to say that I won't be covering absolutely everything in this game in detail, as there's a lot here to cover, and despite my love of detail, I don't want this to be a 2-hour video. Secondly, this will be my personal thoughts and critiques of the game and each of its elements, so if there's something here in the video that I say that you don't agree with, then that's absolutely fine and dandy, and I'd love to discuss this with you in the comment section afterwards. But enough of me babbling on, let's go ahead and take a look at this thing now, shall we? Our adventure begins back in the prehistoric past, where a meteorite strikes the Earth, causing the area to explode and wipe out the surrounding wildlife. Flash forward to the present day in Antarctica, and we see a team of explorers excavating the location of the meteor's crash site, only to discover several Polynesian artifacts similar to the ones found on Easter Island, and a wooden sign that reads Paul Caulfield 1812 to 1834. And right there we're given all the setup we need for the game's story. We have our mystic Macguffin, we know it's got a lot of strange history around it, and we also know that someone else has discovered it long before we have. Now all that's left is to inevitably steal it to add to our garden as a water feature. The main menu is the same as it was before in previous games, but Croft Manor is back and better than ever with more rooms, secrets to find, and activities to partake in. This time the indoor gym from the first game is back, but with more obstacles included to account for Lara's expanded moveset. The basement from before is also back, but instead of it being full of treasure, this time it's been turned into a giant aquarium complete with fish that you can swim around with if you find the secret hatch in the ceiling. The loft has also been expanded to include a secret area that you can access through the chimney, once you've turned it off of course, and the assault course has also been beefed up with some extra obstacles, as well as including a shooting gallery right at the end for target practice. Wait, hold on a second. Is that Winston wearing a suit of plate armor with a target painted onto it? May I remind you that this man is a frail old pensioner who by now likely suffers from severe cases of arthritis and incontinence, and is totally okay with not only being locked in a freezer, but also being used as human target practice. I'm not sure whether or not to call Winston the toughest pensioner ever, or just call someone to take him away to put him into care. Someone get this man a comfy chair and a pack of Werther's Originals, for God's sake. The maze from before is also back, but has been replaced by a massive quad bike racing track that you can only access once you've found the secret racetrack key in the basement fish tank, which seems awfully inconvenient, but once you get access to it, it's a nice bit of fun, and a great place to practice some of the game's vehicle controls, and I can just remember me blasting around as a kid trying to beat my own times for hours. Sadly, it's at this point that we have to say goodbye to Winston and Croft Manor, as this game was the last in the core design series to properly feature them in this way. I'll never forget our time together. Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows, only time. With that out the way, let's move on to the main game. Unlike the last game where the first level was far more linear and claustrophobic, here this game's first few levels are far more open in its design, with multiple paths to explore and several secrets that feel much more natural to find. It's not a forgiving beginning either, as you've got new dangers to avoid like piranhas and quicksand, as well as deal with existing traps from previous games like spike pits and boulders. This is technically even more of a brutal start to the game than once before it, as the number of traps and hazards that can catch you off guard here are exponential and can sometimes be a little bit unfair. But with all that in mind, I'd still say that this is a far easier game to get into than Tomb Raider 2. With Tomb Raider 2, I found the challenge was more artificial, partly due to the unfair placement of traps, but mostly to do with the large volume of gun enemies placed in some quite frankly awful locations. Here in Tomb Raider 3, the challenge comes more from the levels themselves, and most of the traps and enemies are placed in smarter locations, and thankfully gun enemies are also kept to a minimum this time and used instead to heighten the challenge of certain areas, rather than being used for every enemy in the game. Once the first level ends, you stumble into a campsite where you meet a researcher that's dressed like a surfer on his gap year and acts like he's completely off his tits on LSD.
Hello? Hello?
What? What do you want from me now?
But Mom, Dad said it was my turn to play the Xbox. Actually, it's just the effects of being isolated in the jungle combined with prolonged exposure to the Infadostone's mystic powers making him go crazy. Also, I completely forgot what this character's name is, so from now on I'm going to refer to him as Professor Dubro. He wanders off into the jungle babbling all kinds of nonsense, and the next level has you following him through the temple and into the stone's resting place. The temple itself is certainly no slouch, and it will make you its bitch on more than one occasion. It's also full of these annoying Shiva statues that can come to life and slap the crap out of you unless you know how to take them out. But the most annoying thing about this level here is that at certain points, without warning, the ceiling can just fall down and crush you, with no way to anticipate it, no way to react to it, and no way to avoid it unless you've played this game before and know where to safely stand. Eventually you discover the stone's resting place, and that Professor Dubro's fellow researchers have all been slaughtered, and are now mysteriously floating in midair like hellish Christmas decorations. Yummy! After exiting the temple, you see Professor Dubro on a raft sailing down the river Ganges and making his escape with the stone impaled in his chest. Ouch! He attacks Lara with his new awesome Mystic Dubro powers, but she manages to dodge the attack and find a quad bike that's conveniently stashed in a corner, gassed up and ready to use to chase after him. So guess what we're doing next? Yep, we have a vehicle section, and it's through a level with lots of pits and very little ways to avoid them. Great. I only briefly touched upon the vehicles in my last video and completely forgot to mention how finicky and clunky the controls were for them, because here there's certainly an improvement, but still not perfect. The quad bike controls well enough, but because of the way the environment is designed here, it actually feels a lot worse than it is. Mainly because there's just barely enough floor to drive on, with multiple pits that you can and will fall into, as well as several difficult jumps you have to make to progress that can often lead to your death if you're not going fast enough. It's not all bad, as you've got multiple paths to take to mix things up a bit and give you different challenges, but ultimately this section you'll likely find more frustrating than fun, in all honesty. At the end, you see that Professor Dubro's raft has crashed at the bottom of the waterfall, and behind it is the entrance to the caves of Kalia, and with it the final level of the India section. It's short enough and essentially a maze level where you have to navigate through to the end with a boss fight waiting for you, but it gets extra points on my levels that Steve finds annoying list for being chock full of poisonous cobras. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that this game introduces a new poison mechanic now, where certain enemies can permanently poison your health and you have to use a medkit to get rid of it. And it's just as annoying as it sounds. More often than not, snakes will be placed in places that hide them completely, like bushes, in the dark, or tucked around corners to ambush you. So 9 times out of 10 you'll just be running around and get caught out by these guys and have to waste a medkit to take the poison away unless you happen to spot them before it happens, which I rarely did. But later you'll come across traps and even enemies that move around and shoot poison darts at you, and believe me, they're even more of a bastard than the snakes are. The most frustrating this got is when I just finished dealing with a previous enemy that had just poisoned me, then used a medkit to cure that poison and be on my way, only to then immediately get poisoned by another enemy or trap I couldn't see, meaning I just wasted 2 bloody medkits. And it's not as if medkits are easy to find in this game either, as enemies are less likely to drop them now than they were before, and more often than not the game will hide them in secret rooms or hold them for ransom by placing them in locations with traps where you have to be flawless with your platforming to collect them. I get that it was included to make certain enemies deadlier and be truer to real life, but this gets very old very quickly. I feel like I'm being a bit too harsh on this game, as for its time these mechanics added another layer to the gameplay and were pretty unique, and you can tell that the team clearly wanted to work hard to evolve the series in any way that they could, given the time frame that they had to make this game. So despite my grievances, I'm glad that they added this thing here. even if this thing here is slightly annoying. Once you've reached the edge of the maze, you fall down a hole into a pitch-black room full of snakes in every direction and have to find your way out without getting bitten and also avoid being flattened by a rolling boulder. Okay, I take back what I said earlier. This game and this mechanic can go die in a fire. The final section has you fighting Professor Dubrow in a room surrounded by lava whilst he throws fireballs at you, but thankfully he's easy enough to take out so long as you watch where you're going or pick up the convenient grenade launcher that's behind him, and once he's dead you can collect the Infada Stone to finish the level. Afterwards we see Lara come from the jungle to a river where she's greeted by Dr. Willard, the same researcher from the intro cutscene. He sees that Lara has the Infada Stone and tells her that it's just one of several artifacts carved from a meteorite that crashed in Antarctica, and now that she's found the first one, he would like her help in finding the rest. She of course agrees, because I guess that second bedroom ain't gonna build itself, is it? And we're introduced to our first level select screen in a Tomb Raider game, and honestly, I really like how it's presented here. The menu itself is just a globe of the Earth, take that flat earthers, and as you swap between locations it revolves to highlight the continent you want to visit and even has a blinking light on the spot where you'll be travelling to. This is a pretty good move because it means that the replay value of the game is increased by a lot, and it means that each playthrough can be different and each of the game's levels can be played in any order that you choose without any penalties. Only that's not strictly true. Now I'm going to give everyone who hasn't already played Tomb Raider 3 perhaps the best piece of advice they could possibly get before playing this game. Always pick Nevada first. I cannot stress to anyone enough how important this is, because Nevada pulls an offshore rig by having a level where Lara is captured and locked up in a prison cell and all your weapons and ammo are taken away from you. And you don't get all of it back. The first time I replayed this game for this video, I had completely forgotten about this and ended up doing this area last, and it wasn't until someone from the Tomb Raider Discord called me bold for doing that section last that I'd realised that I'd made a huge mistake. So my grenade launcher, my rocket launcher, MP5, shotgun, Uzis and harpoon gun, and all the ammo and medkits that I'd spent 12 whole levels collecting and finding secrets for were now all completely gone. It wouldn't be so bad if they stashed all your stolen gear away in a room with your pistols, but no, they're not even there. So instead you're just stuck with starting pistols and a Desert Eagle and have to search around the entire game for ammo and guns again. Thanks, game. Thank you very much. Trust Tomb Raider to make their own damn level select screen a trap to avoid as well. Speaking of Nevada, let's take a look at that section next. Here we start off in the desert where Lara is making her way to the infamous Area 51 government base to retrieve the next artifact. On the way, she encounters several eagles, snakes, and several angry denim-wearing bikers. By the way, nice little nod to Doom there, guys. Good job. There are also several moments where you see low-flying stealth bombers fly past you, and they're not even enemies that you have to fight, but one of the many ways this game's environments have grown to become more immersive. Here it's definitely apparent that they had much more of a grip on the game's engine, to a point where they were able to add more non-interactable objects into the levels that immersed players more into their surroundings and made the environments feel much more alive. Sure, I mean by today's standards it looks pretty basic and rudimentary, but don't forget, for its time this was pretty cutting-edge stuff for PlayStation. Well, until Metal Gear Solid came along, that is. Eventually you steal another quad bike, but end up crashing it after making it try to jump over an electric security fence. Shortly afterwards, she's carried away by 2 security guards and put in a prison cell within a government base. And you spend the next level trying to escape from it and reclaim your gear. And because Lara is so badass that she apparently lacks the ability to punch people, for some reason, you're forced to either run away from enemies or release a big strong man to have them do the dirty work for you. Unlike the previous games where you end up collecting your weapons fairly soon after you've lost them, here you are left without weapons for about 85% of the level and have to sneak past guards and dodge many laser traps that can either kill you or instantly set off the base's alarm, causing more guards to appear. Stealth isn't something I ever thought really worked in the earlier Tomb Raider games, especially because sneaking past enemies requires a more precise level of control than what this game offers. Lara lacks the ability to subdue her enemies with a stealth takedown, so immediately you're limited to just sneaking past them as your only option here, and the levels themselves aren't exactly built in ways to allow you to make the most of this mechanic either. There are several vents that you can sneak through to get past certain areas with guards, but the way the guards' line of sight is programmed in this game, it means that if you're in a vent and just so happen to be within a few feet of the opening whilst they're walking past, they'll still end up spotting you even if they're not looking at you, which ruins the entire mechanic. I don't know, it just seems a little poorly thought out, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was one of the many elements that just didn't have enough time to be fleshed out and developed more. But again, I'm glad they at least tried to experiment with new ideas that didn't always work, rather than keep doing the same thing and not evolving the series. After finally Finally getting your guns back and hitching the ride on the back of a truck to pose for a light beer commercial, you enter the main Area 1 facility and eventually discover an actual alien spaceship as well as a lab with a dissected alien still lying on the table. And of course, Lara treats this sudden reality-shattering bombshell that we're not alone with about as much significance as someone who's just done a wet fart in a lift and said sorry. Oh, and there's a tank with some whales in swimming around a save crystal. That's also important. Hashtag save the whales. My favourite part of this level has to be where you set off an entire rocket just to lower a small hatch blocking a ladder to the roof where the entrance leading to the rest of the level is. You know, I would love to see the daily work routine of some of the people in this universe here, because I can just imagine that if you wanted to pop to the toilet for a piss, in order to open the door first you'd have to launch a nuclear missile strike at North Korea. Perhaps one of the most interesting parts of this game, and impressive in my opinion, is the last part here where you go inside the alien spaceship, which appears to be really small from the outside, but when you go in, it's absolutely huge. I'd really love to know how they did this, because even though this is such a simple trick, this small touch adds so much to the level and is a great bit of environmental storytelling. It's just a shame this technique is only used for one room. It's just fantastic. Once in the ship's cockpit, you fight a bunch of dudes, find the next artifact, and then finish the level. Awesome. Okay, let's choose where we want to go next. Let's go to...
Back in London!
Here we don a black catsuit and begin our search for the next artifact in the dark, dingy, rain-soaked rooftops of London. This area is more like the urban-styled levels from Tomb Raider 2, except they've doubled down on the concepts from those levels and are now more multi-leveled and claustrophobic than ever before, but certainly more refined and more interesting. The first level starts on the rooftops outside St. Paul's Cathedral to then transition to an industrial plant where you kill Johnny 5, and then it's back to the rooftop section again and over to the cathedral roof. Whilst this is happening, Lara is being attacked by several mercenaries for unknown reasons, and it's not until she roughs one of them up by the cathedral's bell tower that she finds out that she's had a hit put out on her by a beauty tycoon called Sophia Lee, who just so happens to be the wielder of the next artifact.
Happy retirement.
Aldwych Station is the next level, and I'm really not a big fan of this one. It's dark, and the layout is confusing, and also because this room exists. Just look at this thing! What is it doing here? And why does it only just start up when Lara shows up? Is it motion activated, sentient, controlled by somebody? I need answers, game, tell me! The layout of this level is very cramped and condensed, with several locations where you think you're making progress towards the end goal, but somehow end up right back where you started. It's easy to miss a lot of important items you need to collect here, because they blend in so well with the environment that you'll often overlook them and walk straight past them. Once you do find something to use, you can potentially spend most of your time wandering around working out where to use them and not actually making any progress at all. The worst example I can think of is this bit here. I've just picked up a coin and have no idea what I need to do with it or where I need to go to use it. So naturally I go searching around the level to find a place to use it, and eventually I discover that there's a ticket gate blocking my progress. So next I assume that I need to then find a ticket booth to get a ticket by using the coin I collected to pay for it. But when I go searching around for a ticket machine to use, I can't for the life of me find any that work. And it wasn't until after a half an hour of searching that I caved in and looked up a guide online. Yes, I know, please don't at me. Turns out that these booths here, yes, these ones right at the beginning that don't look the slightest bit interactable, are the ones that give you tickets. But the kicker is that only one of them works. To make things worse, they all look alike, meaning it's trial and error until you find the one that works. But eventually, after much frustration, hey presto, I finally got my ticket. Now to remember which way I need to go in order to use it again. Anyone? Has anyone got a map? I need an underground map, please. I'm all for a challenge in a game, and I realise that not everything needs to be spelt out for you, but if you've built a level where an object's key to player progression is something that can easily be ignored or considered by the player as background set dressing, then, my friend, you have failed at objective conveyance. Also, how about this for a creative way of trolling players? Check out these surprise motherfucker trains that the devs put in to stop you from going out of bounds. I can't believe I just got ninjaed by a London subway train that's travelling faster than a Japanese Shinkansen. Eventually, after gunning down several people and dogs, you drop down a hole and get captured. Again. This time it's by the same enemies that you've been fighting in the last level, who instead of killing you on sight drag you over to meet their leader. He tells Lara that they call themselves the Damned, and they're all unwitting test subjects for Sophia Lee's immortality experiments, and now they live in constant torment and pain because her experiments made them immortal, but caused their flesh to rot. Ah.
I don't even have a face, man.
And I say immortal, but obviously not immortal enough to stop Lara from ruthlessly gunning them down or blowing them up, apparently. The next level is the infamous Lud's Gate, which has you sneaking into the Natural History Museum to steal some embalming fluid for the damned. This is the longest level of the game and possibly of any Tomb Raider game I've played so far, and is also the first instance where I noticed that you can take alternative paths through a level. The first half of the level was pretty straightforward. You sneak around the museum, kill a few innocent guards just doing their jobs, and make your way through the exhibits to find the item they're after. Once you find it, you can choose to either jump to the ledge where the embalming fluid is, but at the cost of taking a longer path that diverts back through the museum and to their hideout, but for a small reward. Or you can choose to ignore the item completely and fall down a large hole in between it and skip to the level's halfway point and save yourself some time. This type of choice also turns up again in the first South Pacific level, and I really appreciate what they tried to do here. Having multiple ways to tackle levels for different rewards is a nice thing for people who want to take the time to explore the surroundings to their fullest. However, from what I could tell, these alternative paths are only limited to a couple of levels, but its inclusion here makes me wish this mechanic was implemented more in this game and also games prior to it, as it's subtle touches like this that greatly improves the game's replay value. Eventually, after a rather annoying and frankly poorly designed underwater stealth section, you arrive at the office of Sophia Lee, whose character model and even face is exactly like Lara's, just with some eyeshadow and some blonde hair thrown in. A few snide quips are exchanged and she runs off with the next artifact and out onto the rooftops of London. What's quite interesting is that in the time that it took for Sophia to run away and for Lara to catch up to her, she somehow managed to get to the rooftop on the other side, seemingly without the power of bridges or the stone. Yes, I know it's a nitpick at best, but it did make me chuckle. The rest of the level is spent trying to work out a way to get over to Sophia to finish her off for good, but with her constant barrage of attacks combined with precise platforming, this makes for a slightly annoying fight. Being that she's actually immortal, she can't be damaged by bullets or rockets, so what you end up having to do instead is completing an assault course of sorts while she shoots giant green lasers at you. Eventually, you figure out that you have to shoot out a fuse box to electrify the bridge that she stood on, because as everyone knows, electricity is greater than immortality.
Science, bitch!
Okay, now that we've killed her and taken what we need, let's head off to the next location, the South Pacific Islands. Now we're on the hunt for our final artifact in a much more tropical and tribal setting than the last few levels. This area is very evocative of the original Tomb Raider, and there are a lot more interesting environments and traps here too, with some of them being truly devious and outright evil. There are these spring-loaded wooden spikes that shoot out of walls with human skeletons still attached, or there are these spinning blades that look straight out of an Indiana Jones movie that come out of walls and can kill you instantly. The environment is also chock full of temples, wooden huts, rope bridges, big trees, waterfalls, and really, if anything, gives off the most authentic tomb raiding experience of the whole game. After going through a local village and taking the most long-winded route to climb a treehouse I think I've ever seen, you meet...
Interrupting, am I?
Vale 4XD?
Not interrupting, am I?
Not bleeding, are you? Not about to use this place as a dunny?
He seems awfully chill for a guy who's just had his leg chopped off and eaten by cannibals. Maybe he does like change.
I don't like change.
He gives you a map showing you how to cross the Great Sea of Quicksand, and a few rooms later you encounter a velociraptor. Okay. Next you climb up to find the crash site of the plane those soldiers came from, so you go exploring around the site to get your bearings and find a few friendly soldiers dotted around and more velociraptors. Oh boy, I wonder where this is going. Later you find an underground cave with some adorable tiny little dinosaurs and a dinosaur nest with a dead soldier inside with a cow. No. Holy shit balls, it's a fucking dinosaur. Of course, as soon as you pick up the key, a T-Rex spawns, because why not? And this is by far the hardest T-Rex out of any of the other games I've played. Simply because if you're anywhere near its mouth, it'll just insta-kill you no matter how much health you have. I'm not kidding here when I say it took me a good few tries to take this guy down, and I'm ashamed to admit that I had to resort to cheesing the game by hiding in this doorway here so he couldn't attack me. I'm not proud, but it was either my pride or making him dead. And I chose making him dead. After progressing through the level, you eventually find another key which you use to unlock the rear hatch to the crashed plane, and the next section has you gunning down raptors in a rocket turret. Yes, you heard me correctly. A rocket turret. And it's so over the top, it's awesome. Once that's over, you blow a hole in a couple of walls and then go through to meet one of the locals, who should really be asking you what the hell that racket was, but instead he tells you some spiel about their sacred stone. From there, you take a trip down a series of rapids on a kayak with some of the worst controls I think I have ever played. It's hard to get across just how bad these controls are without playing it and experiencing it for yourself, but just look at this. I swear to God, I am holding down the button to try and turn this thing around, but it just won't budge. Most of the time I spent facing backwards, which really didn't help my situation at all, as it meant that I couldn't see where I was going, and each time that I tried to correct myself, I'd fall down another slope and end up back at square one. Take this part, for example, here, where I decided to take a left turn, saved, and then realised I'd turned into a literal dead end and just saved myself into a corner. So I figured I'd just turn myself around and go back the other way, and you'd think something as simple as turning around would be a simple task. But the strength of the current combined with this piss-poor turning circle means that this took me 10 minutes to do. 10 fucking minutes! Oh, and to whoever decided to assign this sound effect when a large pool of water empties, yeah, thanks for making me deaf, guys. R.I.P. headphone users. The last area is a series of trials interspersed with dudes that blow poison darts at me, making me waste more of my medkits, and then we get a boss fight with a dude in a chair. Seriously, does this guy think he's so almighty and powerful that he doesn't need to get out of his chair to fight me? Oh, okay, I guess he doesn't. This fight isn't too hard in all honesty, and it just involves you jumping left to right over and over while shooting the crap out of him, and occasionally his weird poison-spitting lizard minions. Oh yeah, I kind of forgot to mention that, didn't I? The last couple of levels, they have weird lizard people that spit poison. Answers on a postcard, please. As long as you don't stand still, he can't hit you, and if you equip the MP5, you can pretty much finish him off in about 2 cycles. Pro tip though, if you're playing this game in a room where there are other people watching, I highly recommend putting headphones on for this part, as the only thing they'll hear for a good while is this. And the only thing likely to end up dead is you. Right, now we can collect the last stone and head off to Antarctica, and the game's final 4 levels. She makes her way to Dr. Scotland's site in the back of a helicopter, only to have it caught up in a blizzard and land on top of some frozen ice. All seems well initially until the ice starts to crack, forcing her to ditch the helicopter before it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Jesus, she didn't even think twice about leaving that man to die. You could say that what she did there was cold. The first of these levels has you making your way towards Dr. Willard's dig site on foot and via a boat. On the way, you come across some of his men who are all hostile towards you even though they're expecting you, several attack dogs, and later come across what I think is a dead body, only for it to suddenly come to life and spray me in the face with poisonous gas.
Poisonous gas! Poisonous gas!
At the end of the level, you find Dr. Willard in a shack who's looking a little bit like Professor Dude Bro from India, and seems to have also become completely obsessed with researching the meteorite. Gee, didn't see that coming. He babbles on about his mad scheme to bring humanity to a new golden age. Where have I heard that one before, I wonder? And Lara suddenly decides that bringing 4 mythical stones carved from a meteorite to a deranged crazy person was perhaps a bad idea. Foolishly, she places the bag with the stones on the table, and Willard decides, no soup for you, and flips the table, knocking Lara on her ass and allowing him to escape with all 4 stones. The next level has you chasing after Dr. Willard through the mines, and from here on out, the game's enemies switch into full John Carpenter's The Thing mode. All the regular enemies have been replaced with mutant creatures that range from annoying to super fucking annoying. But don't let the enemies in this level fool you. The real enemy here is the level itself. Believe it or not, I don't actually mind the minecart sections of this level, partially because they're actually quite fun, and mainly because the crashes are absolutely hilarious. The part that really puts my balls in a Nutri Ninja and hits puree is this section here though. See, the developers decided that swimming just wasn't dangerous enough, so they included a temperature gauge that limits the time you can spend underwater, which does make a lot of sense as you're swimming in Arctic waters, so of course you'd freeze to death if you spent too long in it. However, you only have about 7 seconds to make it back to the shore once you're in, and most of the time it's just barely enough time for you to make it back to safety. So then comes this part where you have to lower a submarine into a lake and use it to get to the bottom, and because it's just you operating the thing and not 2 people, you have to lower it first, dive in after it, and then hope to Christ that you have enough medkits to buffer your health before you die. No joke, this section here made me burn through so many of my small and large medkits to finish it that I had barely enough to last the rest of the game. After that, it's just a straight shot to the next level, which is the lost city of Tinos, and the game's penultimate level. It's not quite as visually striking as similar levels from previous games, but it still has some standout moments and offers a decent enough challenge. Most of the level revolves around you completing various challenge rooms to obtain items needed to open up the door to the final boss. Each of these rooms has a different theme to test the player in various different ways. There's a room with a maze that finishes off with spiky log traps, an underwater section where you have to navigate through several rotating blades, a room with fire platforms where you have to use a map on the ceiling to work out which ones are safe to jump on, and a quicksand room where you have to make your way to the top and then back down again through an earthquake. This room here is definitely the most challenging one, where you have to navigate invisible platforms whilst avoiding falling into a lava pit and also avoid being burnt alive by these statues. The enemies in this level also shift from half-mutant humans to a much tougher giant mutant that shoots projectiles, but perhaps the biggest creme de la fuck you has to come from these wasp enemies, who I swear to God are the most annoying enemies I've encountered so far because they just won't stop spawning. I managed to get them to stop on my first playthrough by just standing there and killing a whole bunch of them until they just stopped. But this time around, they just wouldn't leave me the hell alone and just kept cropping up in all kinds of annoying places just to piss fucking... go away!
Oh, no, not the beast!
Finally, you shut down the beam of light thingy and then enter the meteorite core's chamber. Dr. Willard has already placed all 4 stones on the pedestals, and as the core rises out of the crater, it causes some seismic activity to throw Lara off the ledge she's standing on and then straight into the pit. Willard, being transfixed with the awesomeness of the core, decides to take the plunge into the crater and merge with its power, which then transforms him into a giant spider mutant, because of course, and serves as the game's final boss. This boss is ridiculously difficult, not just because of the lava pits covering the whole area that you can easily fall in, but also because he's invulnerable to damage and can only be stunned until you've collected all 4 stones. To do this, you have to shoot him enough times to become stunned. Once you do stun him, you have an extremely small window of opportunity to then run to one of the stones, pick it up, and then sprint back before he one-shot kills you. If you are so much as 1 second slow and don't make it back to the middle again, he will get back up again and shoot you, and it's always a guaranteed kill. By the way, did I mention that each shot he fires is a guaranteed one-shot kill? Because this boss has a guaranteed one-shot kill. Every shot homes in on you no matter what you do to try and avoid it, and it's impossible to dodge. So even if you think you can avoid his attack, you won't, and you will die like the bitch this game thinks you are. But perhaps the most annoying thing about this fight is the fact that PlayStation 1 players had to do all of this in one go because of the save crystal system. Yes, that shit is back. It is such a baffling and frustrating design choice to not only bring the worst thing about Tomb Raider 1 back, but also make it a consumable item. At least with Tomb Raider 2 you could effectively quick save as many times as you wanted to, but here if you get to this part and you have no save crystals left to use, then tough luck Buttercup, get good. The same also applies to other sections of the game too. I can't even begin to imagine what playing this game would have done for my stress levels, especially having to do them in one take. Why the fuck did they think this was a good idea to bring this back? All I can say is thank God I'm playing this on the PC version, otherwise I think I would have had a stress-induced heart attack at this point. Weirdly though, they're still here in this version, but all they do is give you full health, so I guess that's something. But why are they still here? Anyway, once you've picked up all 4 stones, you can finally finish them off, and all that's left for you to do is to climb out of the crater and make your way to the— oh god damn it, son of a bitch, motherfucker! And then reach the helicopter pad to finish the game. The last cutscene shows Lara stealing a helicopter after killing the pilot, dodging some anti-aircraft missiles, and then taking out another helicopter that's chasing her before then flying off into the sunset. And that is Tomb Raider 3, a game that's like being given a big birthday cake that's made of all of your favourite flavours, only to discover once you've bitten through the top layer of icing that is actually full of shards of glass. This game was a tough one for me to cover, as I had a lot of fond memories with this game, more than I did with Tomb Raider 2, but I tried to put my nostalgia aside and look at absolutely everything from a fresh perspective. The vehicle controls are for the most part a lot better to control than the last game, and there's a large variety of ones to choose from that cover all kinds of terrain, which is really nice. Voice acting has improved, and there are a lot more in-engine cutscenes this time that do a nice job of telling the story of the game whilst also keeping the player immersed. There are of course a few pre-rendered cutscenes here too, and the quality of them is better too, with better animation and also better quality graphics. Speaking of graphics, they also got an upgrade in this game too, this time allowing for weather effects and more dynamic lighting techniques, which for the time was extremely impressive stuff. The game engine also got upgraded to be able to use triangular polygons instead of just square ones, meaning that the environments could be built to look more realistic and less blocky, which is one major hurdle that a lot of people find hard to overcome when revisiting these games. The challenge this game provides is really brutal at times, but it feels a lot more natural than the one that Tomb Raider 2 provided. There's much more of a difficulty curve here, and more variety to the enemy types too, with gun enemies thankfully being used sparingly to ramp up the challenge more naturally. While there are a lot of creative and elaborate traps in this game, none of them really feel out of place with their environment, and they've clearly had some real thought put into them, which was a complaint that I had with some of them in the last last game. Unfortunately, there's a few pacing issues with the game, particularly in the London section, where it feels like it drags on for a lot longer than it really should. No joke, it took me nearly an hour just to beat Lud's Gate, and that's just the in-game timer. In real time, it was almost double that. I also find it pretty daft that you have the option to play the game in any order that you choose, but if you choose any level other than Nevada first, you've effectively handicapped yourself due to having all your gear taken away. Despite the minor complaints, Tomb Raider 3 is still a very decent game to play. So long as you don't mind a tough challenge and can stomach the outdated controls, you'll find a very enjoyable and engrossing experience here. Out of all the classic games that I've played so far, this one comes the closest to knocking the top spot off from Tomb Raider 1 for me. It's a very good game and not the black sheep of the series like most people seem to think it is, but it's just not quite as balanced as Tomb Raider 1 is. Tomb Raider 3 was considered yet another commercial success for Eidos and Core Design and sold over 6 million copies worldwide. However, this was the first game in the series that started to receive criticism for not changing up the formula enough and being too derivative of itself. Unfortunately, this was due to a pretty ridiculous annual deadline put on the shoulders of the developers at Core Design, which was mostly because of the massive success that Tomb Raiders 1 and 2 had. I don't think anybody could have predicted just how much of a success the series would become after the release of the first game. So in order to keep the momentum going, they worked on getting a sequel out as fast as possible, which ended up paying off for them spectacularly. However, because of Tomb Raider 2's success, the expectation was there for a new game to come out the following year. So this meant the existing Core Design team had to expand again and try and make a bigger and better Tomb Raider game than the last one, and with only a year to do it in. So of course, with this time constraint, they had to use what was already available to them and build upon the existing game engine to try and create something new and completely fresh. So with all things considered, it's really impressive that this was what they were able to come up with. But all the pressure of demanding development schedules and annual releases was starting to take its toll on the team at Core Design. A lot of the developers had done nothing but work on Tomb Raider for 3 straight years and were understandably quite sick of the project and with the character of Lara Croft altogether. So for their next project, they were so fed up they decided in secret that they were going to do the unthinkable. They were going to kill Lara Croft. But I don't have a copy of that game, so I'm going to have to ask Winston to get one for me, so just excuse me. Oh, Winston! Oh, Winston! Strange, that usually works. Winston? 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 The hell is he? Winston! Winston? Where have you gone? I know, I'll give him a call.